Thoughts on the Global Fight League or GFL announcement? Yeah, dead on arrival. They should call it the DOA, as I mentioned, dead on arrival. That thing is going to go nowhere. Absolutely nowhere. Let's talk about it. If you watch fight sports long enough, you don't have to be a genius. Certainly am not. But things just began to rhyme over the course of history. I lived through the time when the UFC was not nearly as popular as it is now and not nearly the dominant force that it is now. When the IFL was around and you had the Quad City Silverbacks and you had, the Tokyo fucking Razor fucks and, whatever all the different names were. And the people behind the IFL spent a ton of money to make that work because they wanted to make a brand differentiator. And they had some other differences along the way, too. There was, of course, the point system for the teams in the playoff and all that kind of stuff. But also they had a ring. They didn't use a cage. They wanted to. This was still at a time when the ring versus cage debate had not been settled in the sport. And they lost all their money and they went out of business because, of course, they did. And I know what some folks might be tempted to say, which is, okay, but like just because the IFL tried it and it didn't work doesn't mean it can't work, which in and of itself is a true statement, but also misses the point because it's not just that the IFL went out of business on the team concept. It's that that's partly true. No one else has ever been able to successfully use the team concept outside of one-off events. So, for example, you might have seen Quintet, and that's sort of like their model, but it's a very small thing. But the point is, you might be able to get like, hey, we're going to have a team concept for this event on this day. And that might be a gimmick you can use to meaningfully attract attention. That's a thing that can actually happen in very, very small bursts. But no one has been able to successfully scale a team concept. And by the way, there's also been like Iron Ring. You guys might not remember that. That was an MMA show built around like catering towards the African-American community and building teams. And that, it was an interesting concept, but it also went nowhere. They've tried this in a number of different ways, and it never, ever works, the IFL being the biggest one among them. And they had over $100 million back when that was a lot of money to make that work. And, of course, it didn't. So you add that in. You add in the fact that it's never been able to be scaled. But that kind of doesn't really tell you the story. The real story is there's basically at the high pro elite level, there's really only one way to do this. You can't actually reinvent the wheel here. And that is you have to have fighters that the public cares about in bouts of consequence or star power. That's it. There's nothing else you can do. Now, you can have a regional promotion, and that can be fine for what that is. And when I say regional, I don't mean just like the mid-Atlantic area, but Aries FC in France, or Cage Warriors, and they're a little bit more international. But let's say the UK or something like that. That can work. Those models can work. But if you're trying to do something beyond just a sort of a geographic model in a larger feeder system, there's only one way to do it. You have to have fighters that the public cares about with either star power or in bouts of consequence. That's it. There is no fucking other way. And this is why I've been trying to say on this like chat for quite a long time that like this is why, among the other reasons, this is why the UFC won't co-promote with PFL and why no one else can compete with them. Because right now, the UFC has a monopoly on the industry, but what they really have is a monopoly on who the public perceives as legitimate. They would have to cross-pollinate with other entities and then watch the results bear out over time for legitimacy to be conferred in other directions. But they close that door before it ever happens. Now, of course, they also have most of the best fighters anyway. We know that. But they probably don't have all of them, right? They probably got most of them, but not all of them. And so they deny that legitimacy to be conferred. And I don't think that, necessarily closing the door to GFL, if they even if they opened it, it wouldn't really change their fortunes for another reason. But you get the point I'm trying to say. Every 5 to 10 years, somebody comes around and says, we're just going to take ordinary, maybe even shitty MMA, but we're going to repackage it in a very confused way with extra layers that really nobody asked for. And we're going to say what we're doing is we're reinventing the industry. We're rethinking things. we're doing things that no one's ever done before. But the reality is people have done this before and it totally failed. And the reality is nobody asked for teams. Nobody asked for fucking clubs. Nobody asked for a point system. Fans don't care. This is almost akin. This is not quite right, but it's almost akin to being like, you know what we're going to do? Hey, you've been to the Renaissance Festival, right? Oh, yeah, you have? Well, we're going to go to the Team Renaissance Festival. And you're like, what the fuck is the point of that? Oh, no. I mean, if you've seen regular Renaissance Festival, wait till you see the teams one. It's like, I don't want to see. I don't. What the fuck does that even mean? I don't even want to see that. Why would I want to see it? I mean, I just want to see. I want my Renaissance Festival experience. I want my big turkey leg. I want the women with the big titties bringing the beers like it's Oktoberfest. I want the jousting. I want people having a good time. I don't need a team's version of this. I just need the version that I want. I want a good version of that. That's what I want. Of course, it doesn't quite work because we're talking about just the upper end of the thing. But this is what I mean. You're adding a layer of complication and what they claim is nuance that serves nobody, that nobody asked for, that history tells us the PFL model itself. I mean, dude, who looks at the PFL model and goes, you know what that needs? An additional layer of complication. That's what that needs. We need to do more to just add shit to it that nobody needs and doesn't actually solve the fundamental problem, which is what kind of MMA are you showing? And then you look at their roster, and their roster is filled with guys who are deep into their 40s, many of whom, not all, by the way, not all, there are some intriguing names on there, but many of whom are mega fucking washed. Many of whom told the court in the antitrust hearing that they have brain trauma and they really need this settlement to help them get the medical services that they require. And now they're signing up. And again, I know there's a draft and many of them may not get drafted, but the fact that they're even under fucking contract is like ghoulish to begin with. Like at every fucking level, this thing is going to fail. Now, let me say two things in response to that, which I genuinely mean. If there was one takeaway from the IFL that I found surprising at the time, but I think you should wait for here, and it will depend on how it goes. The fighters themselves actually loved the team concept at the IFL. It fell apart over time, and that's what will happen here as well. But there were many of them that really kind of believed in it, that wanted to win for it. Again, there was an incentive structure for them at the time. But you might actually see the fighters themselves speak highly of it. You might see them really, really genuinely buy into it. Like that's a thing you should probably expect if past is prologue. That's the first thing I'm going to say. I forgot what the second one was, but well, just that it's just going to collapse in on itself when it here's what it's going to happen, because this happens every time they do a team concept. It's going to make some fights that you never expected happen, and they're going to be great. But on the other side, it's going to get in the way of a lot of fights that people would prefer to see, that you can't make because you're locked into a system that simply will not allow it. Or, as you guys all know, especially given the roster of who they've got, guys in their 40s, a bunch of them hella washed. There's going to be injury fallouts, and there's going to be guys who, lost to this guy, but because there was a late replacement, they're going to have to come back at the end of the tournament. It's going to fuck the whole thing up. But at the end of the day, it's a basic question. What kind of MMA are you showing? Are you showing the fans the big name fighters that they care about in bouts of star power or significance? And if the answer to that is no, you can put a team concept on it. You can make them fight in a fucking car. You can make them fight on a barge. You know what I mean? And it's just ordinary MMA. You didn't change the rules of the actual sport, although you may. I mean, we'll see if they even allow elbows. But it wasn't like you gave us a different thing. It wasn't like you gave us BKFC or Pride rules where you kick soccer kick and stomp. You're giving us ordinary MMA with people who are mega washed. Not all of them. Many of them are not, but many of them are mega washed and or in their 40s and or telling the fucking court that they have brain trauma. That's the only thing that really will determine what kind of. And by the way, they don't even have a broadcast partner, but forget that part too. Imagine if they did. That's the thing that matters the most. What can you answer about that question? Do you have names that the public deeply cares about, that are that they recognize as the legitimate guys in their weight class, in bouts of consequence that the public can get behind and or is their star power. And I know they got a lot of like faded UFC names, but they don't have anybody on their roster that can do that. Not very few anyway. There might be there were some intriguing names, but very, 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 very few that can even approximate. I mean, they're on that roster probably because they can't do it, right? The UFC just let them go. It cannot work. It cannot work. And I know it's weird. You're like, well, if it cannot work, how do these things keep happening? How do these Silicon Valley, that's who they claim the money comes from, how can it be that people will still give money to this if these ideas fail? This is a question I have been wrestling with since I've gotten into fight sports. You cannot imagine how much money investors take a fucking bath in this sport by giving it to causes that are hopeless from the word go. It happens all the freaking time. And it's because people who I guess know the fight game, or at least think they know the fight game, they make a compelling presentation to people with money who just don't know any better, and they just keep fleecing them. And, you know, I'm not saying that these people who are running this organization are acting in bad faith. They might believe this bullshit. I don't know. They genuinely might. They genuinely might. Who's to say? It cannot work. It cannot work. You cannot fix having 47-year-olds doing bad MMA by putting a team concept around it and saying, hey, we give 50-50. Oh, this is the thing I was going to say. The good part about them is fighters need a place to go. And so they're talking about 50-50 pay splits. That's great. They're talking about insurance and retirement benefits and all this stuff. This is all great for as long as it lasts, right? But it can't last under the way in which they've done it. And then the common response is, well, if what you're saying is true, then what can you do? And the answer is not much. This is why you have to have a genuine alternative to what the UFC does, like a BKFC. Similar, but different, but meaningfully different, right? Similar fan base, but very, very different kind of product. And you know, this is why like one entity running the whole show, it clamps down on what is possible further in the industry. Now, a lot of these guys wouldn't be fighting anyway, even if there was like vast diversity of, you know, there's a lot of different promotions like there is in boxing and, you know, whatever they were trying to get signed. But you would at least see like all the promoters would have the ability to like somewhat differentiate the product. But at their core, what they would be doing is the same thing. Big name stars that the public recognizes as legitimate against guys of a similar vein or star power in bouts of consequence. That's it. That's the game, folks. That is the entire fucking game. And they're not doing that. They're not even doing anything close. What they think they can do is take basically what's probably going to turn out to be really bad MMA, and they could put a team concept behind it, and they can, you know, have a draft and all this stuff. And that's going to make it so that all of a sudden watching bad MMA is good. Like the team concept is, you know, like imagine looking at the NFL and thinking, you know what we need to do? We need to do a football league where there is no draft. Like, well, they have a draft, we won't do one. You know what I mean? Like looking at the NFL and thinking that the way to fix this is to take all the guys who are either aged out of the NFL or couldn't make it in the NFL or washed out of the NFL, and then putting up some kind of weird different football concept behind it that football fans never asked for, and then being like, that's going to work. The fighters might really like it because they might be getting more money or have an opportunity to go to a place other than PFL. And for that reason, I am grateful for them. But I really hope everybody understands you cannot package bad MMA as good MMA by just changing how we perceive it with extra fucking format changes. It's still what it is. Bad MMA. And as long as that is the case, it cannot succeed, and it will not succeed. And it doesn't matter how hard they try, unless something happens to UFC and all their talent disperses, in which case now we're playing a different game. I think still their concept would fail over time because of all the reasons aforementioned, but all right, you would at least be in business because you could make some of the fights with people that the public recognizes as legitimate, big stars in fights of consequence and or star power. But as long as that is removed, it cannot go anywhere, or become a regional league, become a league in France, become a league in Germany, become a Canadian thing or something like that. It will fail. It will fail. Not immediately, although that can happen sometimes too, but it will fail. The industry is very, very, this is the weird thing where you see all these fighters coming out after fighting and being like, I'm going to make my own promotion. I'm like, I'm old enough to remember fighters wanting to get very far away from that because it's so hard to make money in the sport, even if you have a regional promotion that's not even trying to compete with UFC, much less trying to, occupy that level of the game. It cannot work, and it will not work. And I know that sounds like, oh, it's very declarative. Time is a flat circle, folks. And if people are going to keep making the same mistakes, they're going to keep getting the same results. Somebody in Silicon Valley is about to be tens of millions of dollars poorer for no good reason, but fuck them. I don't care about them.